And now it's time for some black magic. So we will start by creating one more payment. I will go to the Buy Now button. We go to the Stripe checkout. I will add a card, the dates, the name on the card, and here you see in the URL we have the ID of the checkout session. I will copy it and I will proceed with the payment and wait until it is completed. Okay, it was completed and I have saved the checkout session ID and we're going to display it here. But just the ID doesn't give us anything. We will try to display the Stripe checkout session we will found by this ID. So we will make a small break here and we will say equals Stripe checkout session dot retrieve, and we will retrieve the checkout session by this ID. Now I will close it and let's see. And here we have the details of this checkout session. Looks quite nice, yes? And for example, we want to display like the payment status. Let's say we will say dot payment status. And we see the payment status is paid. Now let's play some more with it. So I will add it as a variable. We will say add session equals Stripe checkout session. And separately, I will display the session equals add session. Okay. And the session must have something like a payment intent. Here is the payment intent. You see the ID of the payment intent connected to the session. Let's try to display it. We'll say session.payment intent. And here we have it displayed. Now, what should we do to display the details of this payment intent? There are actually two things we can do. The first thing is we can say add Stripe payment intent dot retrieve, and we will find the payment intent by the session dot payment intent. Here's what we can do. And here we have all the details of this payment intent. The second thing we can do is use the Stripe expand method to include the payment intent into the session retrieve. It would look something like this. We would say add session with extend equals Stripe checkout session retrieve. I will just copy all of this. But here we will pass ID equals this one and comma extend, expand, and we're going to expand into payment intent. I'll just add it in another line so that it is more readable. Expand payment intent. Now I will close the gaps. And close the Ruby code. And try to display the session with expand. And see what it gives us. Add session with extend. Oh, actually expand, not extend. And here we have a lot of code. Let's just make it a tiny bit more readable. I will add one more break here. And here on the bottom we have the session and the payment intent connected to it, and all the details of the payment intent. Now, what do we want to do next? We want to display, let's say, for example, the line items. So the checkout session, if we go into the controller, has a few line items that have a price and a product connected to the price. So, for example, we want to display the price and the product that was sold in this specific checkout session or in the specific payment intent. How can we do it? We would want to expand the session not only with the payment intent, but also with the line items. Line items, okay, I will refresh. And you see now we have even more code here. And if I type li like this, you see we have a line item. And the line item will also have a price and the product. Here is the product and the price. Where is the price? Here is the price. Now let's try to just display all the prices or all the products that we retrieved from this Stripe checkout session. Let's say session with expand dot line items. What will it show us? Here we've got just the line items. We have just one line item in this checkout session, and the line item has one price and one product. Now, if we copy this price, we can see that it is the same price as here. So from the session, from retrieving the session ID, we managed to link the Stripe checkout session to this particular product. And you see, this path was quite long. And now let's even go deeper into this JSON line. What if we want to just display the price or the product ID? Well, payment intent has a lot of line items. So we will want to list all the line items and display the product of this line item. Now you see all these line items are nested inside the data attribute. So we will want to say line items.data. And already it's shorter. And what if we try to just directly call the ID, .id? Well, it gives us nothing because there is an expectation that there are a lot of line items. So we will enumerate all of them. Each do line item. Okay. An end statement, and let's display each line item separately. Equals line item. So here we have each line item. Well, actually, there is only one line item to display. Let's say line item.id. And here we have the ID of this line item. Yeah, actually, I will remove this equals so that it is more visual and more correct. Here we have just the ID of the line item. If I display the line item without the ID, what will it have for? Yeah, here's the line item. So now we can directly try to grab the price. Let's say line item.price. Here is the price, and let's say .id. And here we managed to grab just this price ID. We can also grab the price.product. Let's grab the price and the product, both of them. Line item price, line item product. Why does it show us so much? Let's see, I will only grab the product. Yeah, so we have the product. And if we get only the price, yeah, we will want to get the price.id. Okay, so this way we have the price ID and the product ID. And this product ID fits the product ID that we have here. So it's correct. This way we kind of hijacked the session ID, and out of the session ID, we retrieved the ID of the price and the product that were sold in the previous checkout session. Looks quite nice. And we can actually make it doable so that we don't have to always copy paste. We don't have always to copy this session ID out of our browser. We can just add this session ID to our success redirect URL. So at the moment it is the root URL, and we can add something to our root URL. So let me see how to type it correctly. We will have plus, and here we will have question mark, session ID equals checkout session ID. So this checkout session ID is a Stripe variable, and this checkout session ID will be passed to the root URL as a params. Now let us see if it works. I will go to buy now once again. I will put in a code. Okay, and my expectation is to have this session ID, this one, in my success URL. URL. And it works. You see, we have this session ID in our success URL. So looks fine, and we automatically have the price and the product. Now, what will be if I remove the session ID out of the URL? I will refresh, just go back to the root path, and I have the same information because in the root path I have a hard-coded session URL. So instead of this hard-coded session URL, I will pass in params session ID. And here also, ID will be params session ID. Now, if I refresh without a session ID, we get this error. Could not determine which URL. Well, because we are not passing any session ID. It is nil. So I will make all of this code visible only if we have a params session ID present. So if params session ID dot present, we are going to have all this code. Otherwise, we are not. Now I will refresh, and we don't have all this code. But if I add this to our URL, like a success URL, then we have all this information visible. So this way we can kind of manipulate some kind of information in our directly in our Rails application, even without using any webhooks. So, for example, you can say that on the success URL, you will perform some manipulations with the database. But that is a next point to discuss. What have we done now? We have passed the session ID to the success URL, so that when we have successfully finished the payment transaction, we are redirected to the success path, and we have a session ID set based on the Stripe checkout session. And we retrieve some kind of information out of the session ID. We can retrieve nearly any information we want. We can retrieve the session, the payment intent, the line items of the payment intent, the prices of the line items, and the products to which the prices belong, and the customer. So basically anything from Stripe. Looks quite nice. And let us save our changes. I will say git status. Okay, git add all, and git commit main, retrieve checkout session on checkout success URL, and looks good. Okay, and now actually let's redirect the success and cancel not to the root URL, so that it is more visible whether the transaction was successful or not. We will have a separate action for def success Okay, and a separate for failure. And we will redirect to success URL and to failure URL. Okay, and now let's add these two actions to our routes. So I'm going to config routes, and here I will say get success to checkout success, and also get failure to checkout failure. Okay, and we can create also the views for success and failure. We will go to our checkout, and here we will create a new file success.html.erb, and we will move all this session ID information into the success URL. And we're not going to have to check if the param session ID are present anymore, because they will always be present if we were redirected to the success URL. And for cancel URL or failure URL, yeah, let's actually better name it cancel URL. We will redirect to cancel URL. And we'll create a view for it, new file, cancel.html.erb. And let's see if when creating a new payment, we are redirected to the new paths. I'll press buy now. And maybe I don't have the server running. Exactly, that's why it did not work. Okay, buy now. Redirecting to Stripe checkout. Card information. And now I expect to be redirected to the success URL and to also have the params. And it works. You see, I was redirected to success URL. Now I can go to products, and for example, I will try to buy now once again. And go back. And you see, I was redirected to the cancel page. Let's also just add some text to the cancel page, something like H1 canceled. And in success, we will have H1 success. Okay, and we will save the changes. So what have we done? We have created a success and a cancel page for the checkout. And now if the successful, in the case of successful transaction, we are redirected to the success URL, and otherwise if cancel. So let's say git add all, git commit main, success, and cancel paths for checkout, for Stripe checkout. Okay, looks good. Okay, now let's go back to our checkout controller. And here we are passing the session ID and moving to the success action. But in the success view, you see we have a real lot of logic. And it would be nice to move this logic into the controller. So the task now is to find the product in our database. Okay, I'll set the server now. But basically, we want to try to find the product in our database in the success path and update the sales count without using any webhooks. Now you see, we did not connect webhooks to our local environment, so the sales count is always 0, and the webhooks for the local environment are all failing. And now we will try to update the sales count without using webhooks in our local development environment. So how are we going to do this? First, we will try to find the products by the line items and update the product sales count. Let's try to do it. Okay, I will remove the logic that we will not need for this. this will be needed, and this will be needed. Here's the logic, and I will move it to our success action. Now I will remove the ERB pod. Okay, looks a bit better. And what do we have here? Now, I think we don't need to expand the payment intent, only the line items. Okay, so we get the session ID, and we expand it with the line items. Now, in the line items, we are going to get the price and the product. Well, we can get either or the price or the product and find the local product by this price or by the product. Okay, let's remove this add. We'll be using this only in the controller. And we will say product equals product dot find by, and we're going to find the product by, let's say, the Stripe price ID or Stripe product ID. Stripe product ID equals line item dot price dot product. And we are going to say product dot update or product dot increment. How did we do it previously in webhooks? We said product dot increment sales count. And let's see if this works. And yes, we can also actually not even have a view for success. We can redirect to another path, but let's see if it works just like this. So I'm going to press the buy now button. You see we have 0 sales now. The card information, the name, and let's wait. And basically, we will be redirected to the success URL and undefined method increment for new class. So we didn't find the product correctly. Now, what can the error be? Actually, here we have Stripe price ID, and we try to find line item price product. So we compare the price and the product. That's the mistake. So we'll say Stripe product ID, line item price product. Okay, we'll go back, and you see it was incremented by 1. I will press buy now once again. Looks like it worked. Again, the card information. And hopefully it will work again, and the amount will be incremented already by 2. I will go to products, and the amount is 2. What if I refresh the page, the success page? I refresh the success page, and the amount is 3. So each time I refresh the success page, you see, I get the sales count increased by 1 more. And this isn't really correct. But anyway, for now, let's save our changes. So what have we done now? We have moved all the logic out of this success path into our checkouts controller, success action. And now, when the checkout session has been finished and we are redirected to the success URL, we find the product that we just sold or all the products that we just sold and increment the sales count by 1. So git status, git add all, git commit main, and what shall we say? After successful checkout, increment the sales price without webhooks. But it's not correct not to use webhooks. First of all, we get this funny error that each time we refresh the success page, the count is incremented by 1. And second, we should also check if the checkout session was definitely successful. And the checkout session can actually be finished a bit later, like even a minute later after we after we were directed to the success URL. And that's why we need webhooks. Webhooks are a more correct way to do this kind of logic. And in the next video, we are going to work on using webhooks to do basically this kind of logic. So we are going to send a request to find the product and to increase the sales count of a product via webhooks, but not by retrieving the session ID, finding the product from the session ID, and increasing the sales count. So that's it for this lecture, and see you in the next one.